This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. Federal party leaders are gearing up for their second major showdown of this election campaign. They're going toe-to-toe tonight in the English debate. It will be the last chance to see them face each other before Canadians go to the polls April 28th. Last night, French-speaking Canadians had their opportunity as the leaders debated for 2 hours en français. Janice McGregor joins me now from our Parliamentary Bureau. And Janice, what stood out for you about last night's debate?
Marcia, maybe the biggest loser were undecided voters who didn't tune in, because the format really allowed all four leaders to lay out stark differences between them and also reveal their personalities too. Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre were on opposite ends of the row of podiums. They didn't even make eye contact at points with each other. It was Yves-François Blanchet standing to Carney's left that got in the first early shot at the Liberal frontrunner, saying there's no proof actually that he's a master negotiator and the best to take on Trump. And it was Jagmeet Singh who had the podium closest to Poilievre that was most frequently tearing down what the Conservative leader had to say, questioning early on the Harper government's actual track record for building housing. And later, during the exchanges on immigration and foreign affairs, when the leaders really differed on their approaches to limiting asylum seekers, for example, we also had Singh say it was disgusting and hateful to hear Poilievre call the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, a terrorist organization and say he'd cut it because it was a waste of money, when in fact the NDP leader said it is the only organization on the ground helping Palestinians in Gaza. And that led to another uncomfortable moment when Singh asked Carney why he wouldn't call what's happening there a genocide. Carney said it's horrible, but he didn't want to politicize the conflict.
Janice, what are you watching for in tonight's debate?
Well, it's not going to feature the immigration and foreign affairs issues that prompted those clashes. It is going to have a dedicated round on what the Debates Commission calls leading in a crisis. There's going to be a separate round at the very end about tariffs and threats to Canada. And it's going to have a round explicitly dedicated to public safety and security. The choice of the organizers to leave healthcare off the list of topics is something that has concerned New Democrats in particular, who have made their advocacy for expanding Medicare central to Jagmeet Singh's campaign. He promised that he was going to try to jam it into the conversation anyway. When he did that last night, there was a moment where the moderator actually cut his mic off for veering too far off the agenda. We'll see if he tries that again tonight.
All right. Thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.
The CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. Tonight, Susan Bonner and Pia Chattopadhyay bring you full coverage and analysis of the federal leaders' English language debate. Stay tuned after for a special edition of Cross Country Checkup. Ian Hannah-Mansing will take calls to hear your reactions to the debate. It all begins at 7 p.m. Eastern on CBC Radio and the CBC News app. There is still more than a week until Election Day in Canada, but inmates at prisons and jails across the country have already had their chance to cast a ballot. Prisoners had to fight for that right. Now, decades later, an Ontario senator wants to improve the process when inmates go to the polls. Dan Tekema has more.
Believe it or not, it takes you out of prison.
Rick Sauvé knows the power of casting a ballot behind bars.
People are talking about politics in prison. They're talking about the platforms, more so even sometimes than in the community.
A former inmate, he appeared before the Supreme Court twice, helping prisoners win the right to vote, regardless of their sentence.
It made me feel somewhat whole again when I got to vote.
Roughly 23 years later, Sauvé's fight has inspired Ontario Senator Bernadette Clément, who's visited 9 prisons to learn about barriers to elections inside.
I would say the biggest obstacle around this right to vote is access to information.
The senator says a lack of internet access means inmates can't read up on party platforms and are limited to watching campaign ads on TV. Another obstacle?
They cannot vote from the riding where the prison is located. They can't vote in the riding where they will spend, many of them, many years of their lives.
Elections Canada says more than 34,000 incarcerated electors, about 41% of those who are eligible, voted in the last federal election. The senator is preparing a report she plans to share with the Correctional Service and election officials after the votes are tallied. Dan Tekema, CBC News, Kingston, Ontario.
Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's relationship with U.S. President Donald Trump will be put to the test today. The two leaders meet in Washington with tariffs on the agenda. Meloni will be the first European leader to sit down with Trump since he threatened to impose a 20% tariff on European goods. Trump then put a pause on those tariffs for 90 days. Ukraine and its future are at the center of meetings in Paris today. The Trump administration sent two of its key players to meet with European officials and security experts. The U.S. and Europe keep searching for a path to help put an end to the war in Ukraine. Anna Cunningham has the details.
The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio arriving in Paris for what's expected to be high-stakes discussions. It is the first time since February that the U.S. has directly engaged with Europe on peace in Ukraine.
So we appreciate you could make it.
Welcomed by European diplomats, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff. He has met 3 times recently with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. These Paris talks come days after one of the biggest attacks of this war by Moscow on civilians in Ukraine.
The Sumy attacks shows that Russia is not willing to cease fire,
says Eleanor Caro, an MP with the French President Emmanuel Macron's Ensemble Alliance party. The very fact that these talks are happening, Caro believes, demonstrates that the US is struggling to bring Russia on side.
It shows the failure of Donald Trump's diplomatic efforts.
Rubio is meeting with Macron. Talks will also take place with French, British and German foreign affairs ministers, along with EU national security advisors. Watching from Kyiv, Alexander Kara from the Centre for Defence Strategy says he doesn't hold out much hope.
We've seen the unreal plans being forged by Mr. Witkoff. That actually is sort of capitulation.
Ukraine's foreign and defence ministers are in Paris for the talks. European diplomats say they will urge the US to put more pressure on Russia to agree to an unconditional ceasefire. Anna Cunningham, CBC News, London.
A key infrastructure project in Canada's north is taking a step forward. The premiers of Manitoba and Nunavut have agreed to develop a transmission line from the province to the territory. It would divert energy the province sells to the United States to Nunavut instead. But there is one partner that needs to come to the table: the federal government. Juanita Taylor has more on what's at stake.
Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew and Nunavut Premier PJ Akerok signed an agreement to partner on a hydroelectric project.
Because it's about nation building, it's about climate change, it's about the economy.
Kinew says his province's wealth of hydroelectric resources will be used to light up the north instead of the United States. On Tuesday, he signed an order to stop exporting 500 megawatts of power to the U.S.
Because all Canadians know, after what they've heard from Trump for the past few months, that we need to really build up our country.
The agreement commits 50 megawatts from Manitoba Hydro to help develop the Kivalliq Hydro Fiber Link, a 1,200-kilometer infrastructure project that will bring electricity and internet service to 5 communities and 2 mines, relieving them from burning diesel for power and heat. Akero calls this agreement historical.
This has been the vision of many Inuit leaders that wanted to connect southern Canada to the north.
Saku Investments Corporation is leading the project. President and CEO David Kakuktingnek calls this partnership a game changer.
Everybody's on the same page and we can go forward to Ottawa and press for the project's approval.
The project will cost around $3 billion, and Kakuktingnek hopes the federal government will cover a third of the cost. Juanita Taylor, CBC News, Yellowknife.
A team of scientists at Cambridge University thinks they have found evidence of life on a faraway planet. They're using a powerful NASA telescope to study the atmosphere of a planet called K2-18b. It is about 120 light years away from Earth. The research is pointing to the existence of molecules which on Earth are only produced by simple organisms. Niku Mandusundan is the lead researcher.
Based on our current understanding, the only scenario that explains all of this is one where it's a Haitian world that is teeming with life. And what is a Haitian world? It's an ocean-covered surface with a thin hydrogen-rich atmosphere, and the ocean being habitable.
Madetsuren calls the discovery monumental, and he cautions that more data is needed to confirm the results. And that is the latest from World Report. News anytime, cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.